You fun travel?
Am I ready to progress? I have a slideshow mode, so it's not showing any of this up there. Just
Like walk around the neighborhood.
there.
I do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Arrow to the right. Okay, cool. All right.
Today to go walk.
There are a few maps and different figures, so if people want to come as close as they can, that would probably be helpful visually.
What's that?
Yeah.
Are you?
I have one.
All right, is everybody settled? Share out there, he knows more about transit than I do. So thank you for everyone coming tonight. My name is Alfred Knotts, I'm the Transportation Program Manager with the town of Truckee, so transit falls under my purview. And I've been in this industry, I was just telling you, actually, I remember the first short range transit plan and 88 compliance plan I did with LSC back in 2000 when I worked at PRPA. So going on 24 years, very exciting to do these plans. Actually, they may seem, some of the plans may seem bureaucratic and very expensive paperweights, if you will, sometimes, but they do provide a lot of utility. And tonight we're here to talk about the short range transit plan. So that is a 5-year roadmap, essentially 3 to 5 year roadmap that lays out. It talks about the existing conditions, talks about the world we live in, what is the town's demographics, what's the economic situation, what are the commute patterns, if you will, how are people moving about the community, also how are they accessing the community, how are they accessing services, the hospital, those things. So we look and take a snapshot of the community, and we can, I think, all acknowledge that within the last 5 years, the community, it has changed. Sometimes you can look at information and it's, I won't say static, but sometimes a lot of things haven't changed, or maybe the population's aged, or a lot of people have maybe left the community. So it's good to make sure that you're putting resources, developing solutions that meet the needs of the community. So that's really what the short range transit plan does. It takes a look at the existing conditions. It looks at future preferred, not preferred alternatives. We're not talking about a project here, but solutions in terms of systems, recommendations, and how to prioritize those. How do you pay for them? This really is a plan that is fiscally constrained, if you will. So it looks at what the town has access to in terms of reasonably foreseeable funding, and then says, how are you gonna fund that? You know, what are the major priorities? What you can do first is gonna make the biggest impact, but also how do you look long-term and make sure all these things are integrated, especially around here when Placer County operates a system. We also have the airport shuttle that goes down to the Reno Tahoe International Airport. We also have resort shuttles. So how do we make sure that we're all working together, even though one of our biggest partners, Placer County, isn't even within our jurisdiction, or vice versa. So we need to make sure that we're all integrated and talking, and this is what that plan really does. It takes a look at what's been implemented over the last 5 years. The last plan was done in 2018. So we're right on the cusp of updating that plan. Like I said, it's a 5-year planning horizon that it looks at. It's also a requirement that we do this plan. Again, I know it sounds kind of bureaucratic, but if we go and request funding from our partners at the Nevada Transportation Commission, not to provide a lot of our state transportation funding, they will ask, is this in your short range transit plan? So it's very important that you guys keep that kind of in mind tonight, as we talk about the plan itself and what those recommendations look like. Because if it's not within that plan, it's difficult for us to make a case that it's not just Alfred's brainiac idea like Tart Connect. And that is an example. That wasn't in our short range transit plan, so that's why the council has been funding that out of general fund and other non-state and federal dollars. Now that we have done some information and collect some information, it will be incorporated into our short range transit plan, but that is an example of a service that didn't exist within that planning horizon that we had last time. One thing that did come out of the last one, again, just to give an example, was the Truckee Thursday shuttles. That was in the plan. That was something that historically hadn't necessarily been contemplated, but since it was in our short range transit plan, that was eligible for funding, even though it wasn't your typical day-to-day general public transportation. But it did identify that was a need, there's a demand there, and then how do we fund it? So those are just kind of some examples that you'll see in terms of the short range transit plan final product. But tonight we're really going to walk through the process, some of the initial findings, if you will, and LSC transportation consultants will we'll take the lead on that. They've been great. We've worked with them for a long time. They've done, transit plans, not only around the whole basin, but they did our short-range transit plan when I worked in Park City also. They've done a lot of work in Jackson also. They understand the resort community dynamics, which are very, very different. And when you schedule a service or plan a service, and then all of a sudden the resort closes in April, then your service may not make as much sense as it did back in January. So those are the things we kind of look at and make sure that you plan those out accordingly. So that's kind of our role in a nutshell. This is being funded by the Nevada County Transportation Commission that I mentioned. So those are our partners. They function as the regional transportation planning agency in California. Again, I know it sounds very wonky and everything, but there is a hierarchy, if you will, or a relationship, and then we are the operator. They don't operate, so they do the plan, fund the plan, they are funding the plan, and then we implement the plan. So that's pretty much it in kind of a nutshell. So unless there's any questions for me, I will hand it over to Genevieve, and then yeah, I guess we'll have a Q&A at the end also, I would assume too. So
Yes.
thank you everyone for coming.
All right. Thanks, Alfred, and thank you for joining us on tax day today. And I think Alfred did a lot of the first few slides here. I'll introduce myself. I'm Genevieve Evans, and I'm a principal with LSC Transportation Consultants. We're based out of an office in Tahoe City. Justine Marmesh is a senior planner at LSC, and she and I are the ones primarily working on this project. And obviously, Alfred and Danielle, also with the town of Truckee, we've been working very closely with them. And Nevada County Transportation Commission is technically our client, if you're familiar with that agency that Alfred was talking about. Again, just as Alfred was saying, today we just want to give you a high-level overview of how we approach transit planning studies. What's the objective of a transit development plan? Give you some of the highlights of the findings that we have to date. Looking at demographics, background conditions. We're going to show you a few graphs and figures. Transit planners like to get into these performance metrics, these numbers. We look at how different services cost and how many riders each service carries, and we compare that to each other so we get an idea of where we might be able to make improvements or what's doing really well, what can you build your momentum on. So we'll look a little bit at that. And then there's the part we're in right now is what we call service alternatives. And this is where we're looking at different options to how we can potentially improve Truckee TART services. We're not to the point where we're making recommendations yet. This is a discussion we're kind of going through and talking our way through. Does this make sense? Does that make sense? And that's why we're bringing you all in today too. We'd like to hear your input on, there's maybe something you're riding the bus all the time and that wouldn't make sense, or what about this? So we'll get to that at the end of the presentation. Again, our approach, pretty standard to a planning process. We've produced a technical memorandum already that talks about background conditions that you'll get some highlights from today. In terms of outreach, we've had conversations with drivers of both contractors of Truckee TART services. So the town manages Truckee TART, but they're actually operated by two separate private contractors, one for the fixed route and one for Truckee TART Connect. So we've had discussions with drivers, to see what are you seeing on a day-to-day basis? Where are you seeing people needing to go? We've also been talking with stakeholders who are have a vested interest in public transit, such as the hospital, Sierra Community House. And then now we're to the point, we have these strategies that we're opening up for public input. Staff will review, and then we'll put together some draft recommendations. So what is a transit development plan? And kind of use that interchangeably with a short range transit plan. In this case, it's always, for years, every time we've updated, it's always been called a transit development plan. But we think of it as a 5-year business plan for the transit agency. And we look at, our goal at the end is to have a set of implementable steps or recommendations, ways we can improve public transit. And it's not just looking at different service options as, okay, do you extend service hours, or do you have a different stop on the fixed route, something like that. It's also looking at the capital side. When do we need to replace vehicles? Do we need more vehicles? Do we need more bus stops or shelters? There's also an institutional component. As I mentioned, there's different contractors for the different services. Is this the best organizational way to provide public transit in Truckee? Does it still make sense? We won't go into that too much today, but that is part of the transit development plan process. And of course, the financial plan. As Alfred mentioned, we need to make sure that we have a fiscally constrained set of implementable recommendations. And transit funding has gotten more interesting in the last few years. It used to be there was just kind of, our funding sources were flat. They come from sales tax and from the federal government, and that's kind of what you get. Recently, there's been a little bit of extra money from the state to help out. And maybe there's other, local funding source options with partnerships or sales tax initiatives that could have another level of funding. So we're probably going to end up with two scenarios. Our basic fiscally constrained, but using the funding sources we know that we have today. And then maybe there's an additional set of options that could be possible if there was more funding available. So with that, we're going to get into background conditions, and Justine's going to take that away.
Great, yeah, thanks for all being here. A little bit of background about our population. Got nearly 100,000 people living in Nevada County, just over 17,000 people of which are in Truckee. Nevada County's population is just slightly decreasing over the next 10 years, but Truckee is anticipated to grow by another 7%. I think it's another 11% by 2040, if I'm recalling correctly. We have a pretty good amount of aging people over the ages of 85, 118% increase between 2020 and 2024. Or 2040, sorry. The youth population is going to be staying relatively the same, whereas the college age and working age are actually expected to decline a bit over the next 10 years. Like I've missed a slide here. So when we consider some of our background information, we are trying to understand what we like to call transit-dependent populations. These are typically people that are between the ages of 5 and 17, those who are over the age of 65, those living below the poverty line, and those living with disabilities, as well as those who do not have access to vehicles. So oftentimes, one or more of these different categories of people could be the same person. So in an attempt to better weight these populations against one another and look at them, might be a little small for y'all. We look at the census tract and we look at their block group. We have area descriptions up here, and you can kind of see where there's concentrations of a lot of those same individuals, right? So folks that are younger, maybe over the age of 65, living below the poverty level, and those with disabilities. You can see here, Lower Sierra Meadows is a pretty highly concentrated transit need area of town. That's what this index is all about, trying to see, where are these high concentrations of individuals who might need transit more than others. This is followed by the Central Glenshire area, as well as the south of downtown Truckee area as well. So it gives a little bit of a picture where these folks live. We looked at commuter conditions, and these have gotten very interesting in recent years, as I'm sure a lot of you guys could anticipate. About 41%, 41.2% of people residing in Truckee also work within Truckee, which is pretty nice. We've got about 7.5% of Truckee residents commuting to Olympic Valley or Alpine Meadows, and we use zip codes to figure this out, followed by 5.3% of Truckee residents commuting all the way to Tahoe City. Of those employed in Truckee, about 37% also reside in Truckee, with another 14.7% commuting from various parts of Washoe County. That was kind of the new information the last several years. A lot of people have had to move. So we've got almost 15% of people commuting daily from Verdi, Northwest Reno, North Valleys, and Southwest Reno. I wanted to note that due to the zip code nature of this search, North Star is included as a part of Truckee, so that may have skewed some of that commuter data. So our services, we looked at Truckee Tart, the local route, as well as the night service to North Star. We looked at the Dial-A-Ride. We've looked into these special events, the Truckee Thursdays and 4th of July services, as well as the Truckee Tart Connect pilot service. We also took into consideration the regional services, like Genevieve was saying. We looked at Placer Tart, Greyhound Flixbus, and the North Lake Tahoe Express, as well as Amtrak connections. This is also probably very small. So we've had quite a bit of growth in recent years, obviously a decline. We don't need to talk about 2021. It's a rough year for transit all around, but since then we've been on the road to recovery, both with Truckee Tart as well as Placer Tart. Placer Tart had about 171,000 riders in 2022-23, and Truckee Tart had about 112,000 riders. By riders, I mean passenger trips, so not individuals, but trips being taken along transit.
One-way trips, yeah.
One-way trips, yes. And I mean, pretty incredible for Truckee Tart to see that jump. And I do know that that includes Tart Connect as well, which is, you know, why it's a little bit higher. Ridership trends in recent years, more of a simplified graphic. While fixed route ridership is down by 27%, Dial-A-Ride ridership has increased by 4%, and Truckee Tart Connect has increased by over 200% since its initial launch.
And we probably should note Truckee Tart Connect services haven't been the same for that entire period. You know, they started as a smaller pilot program and they've grown, so, but it still shows a rather large decrease.
Definitely. This is another graphic of our ridership throughout the year. As Alfred was saying, we have a lot of seasonal fluctuations to our ridership. Not everyone who rides in the summer rides in the winter, and vice versa. You could see the ridership definitely starts to creep up during November. We attribute that might be a lot of incoming of new employed people locally to work at our different ski resorts. Whereas Truckee Dial-A-Ride stays about the same, which would make sense since that's usually our year-round folks living here. This is another interesting graphic of just since the last fiscal year of Truckee Tart Connect, we've seen just all of that growth, right? So spring by month of 2023, we were seeing anywhere between 300 and 340 average daily riders in the months of April, May, and June. Whereas now we're seeing, you know, in the 600s in this last winter season of ridership along Truckee Tart Connect. Getting into a little bit more of the services as they are broken out by passengers per mile and passengers per hour. We're finding that Truckee Tart Connect has, you know, almost nearly the same passengers per hour as our local route does, just a little bit under. Whereas Dial-A-Ride obviously has a little bit less, and the passengers per mile are also more or less the same between the three services, which is pretty interesting. Operating cost by service, in case you were wondering, Truckee Tart Connect costs the most at $1.2 million to run annually, followed by the Truckee fixed routes at 1.1, Dial-A-Ride around 400,000. And then we get into the smaller services like Truckee Thursday shuttles are about $57,000 per year, and the 4th of July parade and fireworks services at just $15,000. Operating costs per passenger trip. So this gets into considering the amount of passengers per mile, amount of passengers per hour, and then the cost to run the service. And we found that Dial-A-Ride is more far away, always the most expensive service per passenger trip, followed by the Truckee fixed routes at about $30 per passenger trip, and Tart Connect at almost $16 per passenger trip. And add that one. Thoughts, feelings? So I'm gonna pass it back to Genevieve. I know it's a lot of information. Come talk to me later if you want to dig deeper on any of those concepts, but.
Does anybody have any questions so far? before we
Yeah, a
get
lot of
into
questions.
it? Yeah.
So with respect to the survey, it's impossible to answer these questions in other than a dartboard format because there's no data shown here. What is the more cost effective? I believe that it tends to be Chart Connect as opposed to the fixed route.
Oh, you mean, yeah.
So you
you're
might
asking,
wanna
you know,
listen to the rest
what
of
would
our
I like to
workshop.
do, this, that, and the other thing? Unless I have more data, as Sherlock Holmes would say, it's impossible to speculate without data.
So this,
So
this
the
survey
survey is really not that valuable.
it's meant to be taken after the workshop.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Okay,
we're gonna go over that in this next portion here, and it's,
Yeah.
they're in conjunction to one another, so I understand it's a little weird out of context. Sorry for handing that out too soon.
Maybe you cover this later as well, but I'm wondering by comparison to other municipalities, is the cost per trip that we're experiencing outrageous,
No.
normal, below, or how, where does it compare?
No, pretty good.
And for Tart Connect to have a low cost per trip like that, and Tart Connect microtransit service is very efficient. Placer Tart Connect is more efficient, so she was saying that Tart Connect can carry 5.6 passenger trips per vehicle hour. That's really good for a demand response service. If you saw the dial right, if you get 2.5 trips per hour, that's pretty standard. So, and microtransit services in non-resort areas aren't getting necessarily 5 passenger trips per hour. And similarly with the operating cost per trip, I think that's also low. For the fixed route, compared to other rural services, it's not outrageous. You know, it, depending that, like Placer County can have some expensive costs because they have a lot of, PERS costs and things like that. So no, but the danger of a microtransit service is you could keep throwing money at it to get your response time lower and to get that, you know, to try and get a lower operating cost per trip, and get more passengers. But then you're just, you know, there comes a point you're just throwing a lot of money at it, so you have to find that balance. So that's some of what we're kind of getting into here.
On this same topic, do you adjust anywhere for the difference in the contracts that you have for fixed route and Tart Connect?
Yes, we use the, you know, if we're evaluating an option for the bus, for the Truckee local route, we're using the cost per hour for paratransit services with the contractor. And if we're evaluating an option for Tart Connect, we're using their cost per hour. Is that what you're getting at?
But what I was asking, isn't the charges, the labor charges much higher for the transit on an hourly basis? Isn't the labor rate higher for the fixed?
Yeah,
route?
their overall contract rate is higher. Yes.
So what if you assume the labor rates were the same, effect would that have?
You mean between the two services?
Yes, between the two.
Um,
Is there anything else we need to adjust for to get a better sense of which is more efficient?
I mean, that's a whole, I mean, that's how it's more cost efficient or not cost efficient. I think a lot of the reason that Downtowner, who is the contractor for Tart Connect, is less expensive is they don't have to have a special license to drive a larger vehicle. So there's a lot less training and you have, smaller vehicles, but I think that's part of it, but it's also, you know, we don't always know what goes into the numbers.
So you don't feel that any adjustment needs to be made for,
I don't think it's a fair comparison to use the same wage rate for both. I mean, you have to go with what they're actually charging us or charging, yeah.
Given that the ridership per hour actually being lower on the fixed route, would it be insane for the town to think about doing away with that service and just making Tart Connect do this loop?
Let's
Can I ask?
go through the rest of it and this may
Okay,
answer some
sure.
of your questions.
Sorry,
One more.
do we know, so, you know, Tart Connect seems to be effective for these metrics, but, do we know if it's having an impact on our local BMT?
Oh, yeah, that's another thing. Okay, so, on a side note, and I think Albert sort of referenced this, Gordon Shaw, who, is also with LSC, did a detailed study for Truckee Tart Connect and did do that analysis, and it actually increased BMT a little bit.
Is it,
can I ask one more question on the population figures? Are you using those population figures to help inform your analysis?
Yeah, that's how we, yeah.
Because Truckee, I mean, less than half of our housing is dedicated to permanent residents. So if you're just looking at population, you're not capturing the increase in potential population reflected in the increased housing.
And when we haven't had to so much for this time around, but you know, if you are looking at an alternative, there are options through the census to determine, houses that are vacant seasonally. So you can, have some.
So for your work, do you feel that you need to be considering the visitors we have?
Yeah, we're definitely considering visitors, yeah.
And so that's just something we haven't seen, you just showed permanent population.
Those were numbers straight from the census, yes. Yeah.
Genevieve, do you
yeah.
have the data that shows whether most of the Truckee or the Target Connect riders in Truckee are single rides? Because we started out with increasing BMT with single rides on the South Shore with Lake Lake.
Mhm.
But over time, if you have multiple people taking, so there's 2 or 3 different parties
Mhm.
taking the same microtransit vehicle,
Right.
and they get dropped off along the way, then your BMT starts to go down.
Right, and I think this analysis was done for data maybe last summer, so there could be an improvement.
Yeah, I think it takes time. It takes time for people to get used to the system
Mhm.
and to start using it with, being okay with other people going to a
Mhm.
different place on the same vehicle.
And the town is looking to acquire zero emission vehicles for this as well, so that's, I think our end goal is finance greenhouse gas reductions. So, you could think of it that way. Okay, so one of the things that we've been noodling around a little bit is, connectivity between Truckee and North Lake Tahoe. As you know, we're a region, right? Not everybody stays in Truckee. We saw that with commute patterns. Placer Tart is a service that provides, service from along the 89 corridor and the 267 corridor. Truckee Tart is really just focusing on Truckee. And we looked at the schedules and we thought about, gosh, if you lived, say, in Hennis Flat, where there's some workforce housing, and you worked at Palisades and you wanted to take the bus, you didn't have a car, you wanted to take a bus the whole trip. Not thinking about Tart Connect yet. Could you do it? And you would end up on the way to work, you would have about a 15-minute layover at the mobility hub, but on the way back, you would have a quick 2-minute layover. And we looked at, other directions too, going North Star, coming from Coldstream. But the way it's hourly service on both Placer Tart and Truckee Tart. You could try and switch some of the times on the Truckee side, but then you're just gonna mess up another connection. So there's really not a good, clean way of improving those fixed route connections. However, we do have Truckee Tart, right? Truckee Tart Connect, excuse me. And that must be how some people are getting to the bus at the mobility hub in the morning, and then in the evening, they can take a pretty straight bus trip through. So our suggestions here would be, maybe there's a way to have standing reservations for Tart Connect for folks. Maybe you have a certain code or something so you could have your Tart Connect vehicle waiting for you at Hennis Flat on a standing reservation basis and get you to the mobility hub and get you to Placer Tart Connect, or Placer Tart, excuse me. And on the other way around, maybe there's a way a Tart Connect vehicle could be stationed at the mobility hub. We also need to think about trips that aren't just work trips, but there's a lot of social service trips. People come to Truckee for appointments, and they may not be at a regular time. So having a Tart Connect vehicle hanging out at the mobility hub, ready to take people to where they go within Truckee, that could help improve those connections. Cost efficiency. So this is part of the transit planning effort. Are there ways we can have the service be more cost effective? So this kind of gets into our discussion. So Downtowner has a lower operating cost per hour than paratransit services for various reasons. So would it make sense? Is there a time of day that the bus isn't carrying that many people that Tart Connect could fill that need, and maybe we would save a little bit of money. So this table here shows average passengers per hour of day. And you see there, it's fairly steady, but at the 5:30 to 6:30 PM timeframe, we're only carrying about 5.6 passenger trips, which happens to be what Tart Connect can do with one vehicle in an hour. And that's what we've been doing. So it is an option. You would have to, during peak times at 5:30, all the Tart Connect vehicles are in use. There's about 9 of them, I believe. So you would have to purchase another vehicle for Tart Connect, and that comes with its own additional capital costs, storing it and whatnot. But here, if you're just looking at operating costs, we could save a little bit of money, we think, doing it this way. About 13,000. Another thing we always like to look at is frequency. We have hourly service on our fixed route bus. Half hourly service would be much better, right? Makes it a lot easier to not miss the bus. So if you added a second bus on the route, it pretty much doubles the cost. So it's quite expensive, but it doesn't necessarily double the ridership, because it's just the way things work. Not everybody's gonna ride twice as much, or there's not gonna be twice as many people. We think it would increase ridership by about 11,400 trips a year. And to put that into perspective, Tart Connect carried about that much in 1 month of November, which is the highest month. So again, we're kind of weighing that, what's more effective.
Where did that number come from?
The 11,000?
Yeah.
So we do what we call an elasticity analysis. So there's a certain elasticity factors that have been developed over years by doing surveys and other transit systems for years, that if you increase frequency a certain amount level, that, the percentage of, you increase frequency, you double it, but you're only gonna increase, the ridership by, say, 0.47 or 0.5. And these are just factors that have been established through surveys. So it's that's where that number comes from.
So it might,
Pretty straightforward.
yeah, it might be very different in our.
It's an estimate.
or
It's a
other-
planning level estimate we got, so. We also thought about, so now the fixed route is one bus, comes from Hannah's Flat, goes down to 50/50, back over to Coldstream. What if you had divided that into 2 loops, like one section, which is kind of the western section from Coldstream to the mobility hub, and then one that went between Hannah's Flat, and now we're going all the way down to Hampton Inn. Might get more people to ride the bus that way, because, so say you're in the 50/50 area, you want to get to Hannah's Flat, now you have to go all the way to Coldstream before you can get back up. But looking at the timing, especially since new stops were very recently added, Rayleigh's and Hampton Inn, I just don't think that the timing, we wouldn't have enough time in the schedule to do that. But we did look at that as an option to increasing ridership a little bit beyond that 11,000 trips.
Would it be, given that, the Tahoe Truckee Unified School District is basically this entire area that we're talking about. They've got these school buses that they use in the morning, and then they use when the kids are going home, but would it be crazy to think that we might be able to use those buses to fill in
Yes.
there? I'm just asking.
That comes up a lot. It's not buses that we need, it's cost and drivers and, the bus themselves, and is not the issue. And school buses are different than transit buses. We have different things that we need. Sometimes for seasonal services, public transit systems can use school bus drivers to help them out, say for summer services, and that's very helpful because they have that commercial license. So that's where coordination is there. Okay, so Truckee Tart Connect. We've heard all the great things. We're carrying lots of trips, carrying lots of people. People seem to love it. However, right now there's no long-term funding source identified. It's a pilot program. And you saw the number of it costing 1.2 million back in 22-23, but since service has been expanded, I think it's getting closer to 2 million at this point if we were to operate it at the same level for a whole year, at least 1.7 or 1.8 or something like that. So it's definitely not a relatively cheap service, but it is carrying a lot of people. So, and some of this analysis is what was done for the Park Connect review that Gordon did. Looking at options of how could we reduce Park Connect service to make it a more palatable number that could be funded. And we have a couple kind of on different ends of the spectrum. The first one there is a more drastic option. This is what if we just used it as like a night service after the fixed route stops from 6 to 10 p.m. So during the day, this would mean that all the neighborhoods wouldn't be served directly. And that's one of the benefits of Target Connect is that you're serving Taladona or you're serving Glenshire. So it would decrease ridership by 75%, but you'd save about $1.5 million. So that's one extreme. On the other end, what if we just reduced service? We stop service between 10 and midnight, Monday through Wednesday. So people may not be having later evening trips early in the week. Ridership would only decline by 2,400 trips, but you'd only save about 33,000. And obviously there's a lot of different levels in between, but here are some examples of ways that we could adjust the TART Connect service to better fit the budget available. Another thought is limiting service to Glenshire at the top of the hour. So Glenshire is obviously a ways out there. And if you're just picking up one person, you're taking a lot of time and you're not grouping those trips that Steve was talking about. So in an attempt to group those trips, what if you made it so that you can only reserve a ride for Glenshire to or from Glenshire at a certain time, you know, at the top of the hour or whatever. So then that just by people having to wait, trips could be more easily grouped and it could be more productive. We think that we would save about $800 a year that way. Another thing that the gal in the back there brought up earlier is that perhaps a lot of school children, or it could be anybody, are using TART Connect for really short distance trips where you can probably walk. So what if we put a policy requirement that the trip has to be at least a half mile? And we think that we could save not too much, about $1,800 a year, and would only reduce passenger trips by about $2,300 a year. And all this data is based on TART Connect. Downtowner has quite a lot of data, origin destination data. We've done a lot of surveys. And so that's how these estimates were developed. Yeah.
I guess it's somewhat related, but what's it really, now that we have it, what's the difference between Dial-A-Ride and Truckee Connect?
Dial-A-Ride, you have to make a reservation in advance. And Truckee Connect is on demand. But that could mean you're waiting 50 minutes for a ride. But Dial-A-Ride, if you know you have a doctor's appointment, and this is more how it's typically used, you know you have a doctor's appointment next Tuesday or whatever day it is, you can call and you have that reservation set so you know you're going to get that trip at the time that you need. So Dial-A-Ride tends to be more for seniors and disabled folks and people who like that.
So with a standing reservation system or even a reservation system for TART Connect, Dial-A-Ride and TART Connect could very much be relaxed.
You mean like what I was referring to earlier? Yeah, I think with the technology, I think there's quite a lot you can do to limit when you can, what you can do on your app. You get certain codes, you could, request certain things. We were talking about, having a TART Connect vehicle stationed at the mobility hub. If you're making a transfer on TART Connect, you can, maybe there's something else you could punch in and then you would perhaps get priority for that trip. Because we really would like to have the continuity and first mile, last mile aspect, so having priority if you're making a transfer trip.
Do we know, specifically with Chart Connect, but I guess also with the scheduled service or the fixed route service, what percentage of riders have the option to use their own vehicles and are choosing not to versus those who have no other options?
Oh, I'm sure we asked that question and I don't remember the answer on the survey, but that's something we could look up. And we
Yeah,
usually
it's in
ask,
there.
do you have a, vehicle available to you?
Do you have a feel for what kind of response you got?
Yeah, in Tar Connect, it's about 30%.
30% have no other option or 30% do have another option?
30% do not have an option. And then on our fixed route, it's far more transit dependent. It's about 95% do not have access to it.
Okay.
So the Tar Connect is really tapping into the non-transit dependent folks. We're really getting people out of their car with that service. The way we've been operating our dial ride and fixed route service in the past, it's really been social service transportation.
Right.
And that's just the nature. I mean, it's an hour headway. If you have a car, if you have access to it, unless you really love transit, you're not gonna go out of your way to wait an hour for, each, and it stops at 6:30 at night too, so it hasn't been structured to really tap into non-transit folks. And I think the surveys too, that we looked at on our fixed route and Ballarat service, Danielle, correct me if I'm wrong, the average income around that is about, people make under $30,000 that ride our system. The fixed route system, Ballarat systems. And on the flip side of the the Tar Connect, we're in the 6-figure demographic.
Okay, one other option on the drastic side for limiting Tart Connect is limit the geographic area to downtown, Sierra Meadows area. Wouldn't be quite as drastic as just the evening service only, but ridership would drop pretty significantly, 94,000 trips a year, but we could save, $973,000. And again, there's different adjustments you can make. One thing we might add to Truckee Chart Connect is, as you're all, I'm sure, very familiar, there's parts that seem like they're in the town of Truckee, but they're not officially in the town of Truckee. They're actually Placer County, Ponderosa Palisades, and parts of Martis Valley. These are not served by Chart Connect. So we did a little bit of analysis to see how much it would cost, we think, to serve those areas, and hopefully we could, and I believe there's been some movements towards this. Is that right? With Placer County to have some sort of cost sharing arrangement?
There has been, yes, we've just talked to them. Right now, we do serve the Hopkins Village area over there in Meadowview, but we don't go any further than that. But there have been discussions about going further and being able to cost recovery for that. Right now, it's been kind of a blurred line, if you will. But as we slowly creep further and further, like into Palisades area, the Ponderosa Palisades area, then the town folk and including our town council who have elected to fund this, it starts diluting the resources away from the town taxpayer. So I know it sounds, again, very bureaucratic, but there's a certain point where we have to talk to Placer County that if we just encompass anything, all of this, then this is what the cost would be, and they're still waiting.
So that's a decrease option. Okay, now to your question is, Target Connect is carrying so many people. Why don't we just, the fixed routes every hour, why don't we just, and it's cheaper to operate as downtowner than paratransit services. Why don't we just all go microtransit? So just doing a little bit of analysis. The fixed route, the local route still carries more trips per hour than microtransit does. But it's close. But we think we would need to purchase at least 2 extra vehicles to soak up that extra demand. And again, there's downsides to that. You have to, first of all, purchase the vehicles. Where do you store them? You have to expand your storage and maintenance facility space. But the big one being that if you want to use the bus to go to work, it can be difficult to use Tart Connect because you're not sure when it's going to come. You want to know that you're going to get there to work on time. So there is a need for fixed route scheduled service. And we do think you might save about 132,000 if you did make that switch. But then again, another downside is you're getting into this whole VMT aspect. There's more vehicles driving around. Is that really what we want? Traffic congestion. At this point, I don't think that's being recommended, but it is something that, you know, comes to your mind, something that should be considered. Truckee Thursday shuttles, that's another one. Do we change that to all microtransit? But their Truckee Thursday shuttles is carrying 21 trips per hour, so we don't want to mess with that. That's very productive for a fixed route service, and it's doing the job, so we're gonna leave that. North Star night service, maybe that would be an option. You could do sort of like a hybrid microtransit. Instead of, right now, it's just a fixed bus, which goes from downtown, right? We have our driver right here, so, downtown to the North Star Village, and it's about, what, 4 or 5 trips a night?
Five trips.
5 trips,
On the hour.
peak season on the hour. So you kind of have it similar so that the microtransit or the TART Connect would only go at those times, because it's a far enough distance. But you could do on-demand pickups along the Brockway corridor, so it wouldn't just be like stopping at Rayleigh's or in the mobility hub. So we might increase ridership a little bit that way. You wouldn't do on-demand within North Star, they have their own dial-a-ride system. So there's a potential for a moderate increase in ridership. You did this, and again, because the cost per hour are different for the different contractors, there would be a cost savings. Which brings me to something I forgot to mention for this first one. Of why don't we operate the Truckee local route as microtransit, is we're using these cost per hour assumptions with current contracts. If you're expanding or changing these contracts significantly, it's very likely that the costs are going to change. So I think the cost savings that we're seeing of 132,000 right now, that would be different if this were actually to be implemented, because the contract would have to be renegotiated. And we have no idea of knowing what that would be, really. So another thing to keep in mind. The last thing there is something called commingling dial-a-ride and microtransit. And this is the idea of and looking through dial-a-ride trips and recently and in the past, dial-a-ride run sheets, you know, what the driver's order of when to pick up who and where. There's some times they're sitting around and maybe they could provide some microtransit trips and take, you know, some of the capacity issues from that. This would require more of kind of long-term institutional agreements between the different contractors, but this is something that a lot of areas are looking at. You have to still give preference to folks who are ADA eligible, who also have disabilities, so you would have to have that factored into it. Okay. So those are the major service options that we've been considering. This survey is as a way to provide input basically on what we talked about today, but we'd also like to hear from you and have a little discussion. And as for next steps, we'll incorporate all the input. We haven't completed the alternatives memo yet, which will be reviewed by staff and NCTC. And then we'll incorporate all that input into a draft plan, which will be presented to the NCTC board and the town council at some point. So I think, yeah, so let's open it up for your input and questions and anything you want to bring up. Well, that pertains to us.
Do you know how often your fixed route buses carry more than 9 passengers?
Per 9 passenger per hour?
No, on the bus themselves, I'm wondering why we wouldn't be able to use the vans, the 9 passenger vans for fixed route.
Yeah, let's see, we didn't have 2:30, there's about 9 and 3:30. And then 6:30 in the morning, there's a bit of a load there too. You also have to think about ADA accessibility.
Right.
Wheelchair lifts.
Right.
And we have vehicles, so.
Right.
Yes,
Genevieve and Alfred too. Hey, currently, our North Star night run is suspended for 8 weeks, give or take. Hey, there's no link in the evenings from Truckee to Sawmill or to the North Shore. You can't go 89 or 267. Is that just something we have to live with for 2 months? I worked in Truckee and lived in Kings Beach. Uber is my only choice.
Yeah, I mean, as of right now, during those shoulder seasons,
Yeah.
just the cost benefit, it's, we were carrying, I think, like 0.5 people per hour, so.
A lot of empty trips.
Yeah. It is, and like,
Those are costs.
it is, yeah, and it's just resources too, so we have looked at when that. We want to continue to fund the service, that we had to focus on where the demand really was, so.
Would you consider doing Tar Connect for those 8 weeks?
That
to
was-
North Star?
That was something, so similar to what Genevieve explained, kind of how the Glenshire would work, that it would come based on an hourly thing, or if there's actually a demand. So there is a model potentially that they wouldn't go to North Star unless there is a ride requested. And it would say, hey, we'll be there in 30 minutes. It won't be, hey, we'll be there right now. It'll come at 10:15 or 15 on the hour or something.
So that's a possibility.
It is a possibility. And now just with the, by the time. When the old plan was done in 2018, a lot of this newer technology, like real-time ride booking technology, didn't exist. So this gives us a lot more flexibility. And even as Councilmember Zabriskie mentioned too, the size of the vehicles, the vehicles that were bought back in, there's a 7-year useful life on these vehicles. When those were bought 7 years ago or 6 years ago, there was a different demand and a different analysis done for it. So there is this really is the time to take a full look at this with a new set of eyes also.
So currently, we will suspend service from 2 months in the spring and 2 months in the fall.
Yeah, and that allows us to give the more robust service during those peak times. If we try to spread it throughout the whole year, there may be a time where, hey, we're coming every 2 hours now, we're coming 12 months out of the year, but so there is a breaking point, if you will, based on the limited resources.
It comes down to cost.
Yeah. And right now, our outside of what the council members have elected to fund out of the general fund through a policy decision, that whole other system, the dial ride and fixed route, we spend essentially 100% of all of our state and federal funding that we get allocated just to provide that service. Because it's based on population. So we get treated, based on our 16,000 residents versus the 100, I won't say 100,000, but I know what happens in the basin when those people are coming through here. But based on that peak visitor demand, that's not calculated in. So when we talk about local revenue measures or tax measures, that is the point. It's not that hey, we need more money. It's more, hey, we're not getting the money from the visitation. We're not hitting the resource or the source of those other dollars that we could collect from that are creating the demand.
Right. That we may deserve.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yes, it's a fair share thing, and we have talked to the county about it, and they've been very Nevada County Transportation Commission, but it's very prescribed at the state level, so they only have so much latitude down the line. About what's your return to source, if you will. We have looked at what we generate versus sales tax versus what we get back, and we're essentially a donor community.
and that is, there are strategies. I didn't get too much into the financial and institutional side here, but there are strategies a whole study that was done
Yes.
on another way to allocate this funding that comes through the state that maybe would give Truckee a little bit more to work. Yes.
Isn't there like a really significant correlation between frequency and use that's kind of the major variable in all of this, and that the hourly cycles and so forth really are not used much because of the infrequency and
Yeah.
so if that is, I understand that's like the big thing, consistency and frequency that, putting our resources to where there can be high frequency and regular routes or whatever that you may be eliminating some of these low frequency routes, because we just can't do it unless we're willing to just throw a lot of money out.
Yeah, and that's the analysis of the half hourly service that we're looking at, is how much more does it cost to get, this 11,000 more trips, and is that worth it? But you're right, half hourly service would improve ridership. It's much more preferable.
Because I it's kind of vague understanding, somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes is sort of the point. And we're not doing that.
And that's difficult to do in a rural area.
What's that?
That's difficult to do in a rural area cost effectively. You had a question in the back?
Yeah, I noticed that you said, about the card connect, there's riders on there that might not be, like the art underserved community as much, right? Or, like,
Yes.
not, right? Is there like a possibility to get like a fee on there? Like, for certain, like, let's say the reserved one, right? That's, I don't know, or like, is there a way to have a fee on there for people to pay? That's not uber, like, high.
Annual
That's still kind of
subscription or something.
affordable, but it's like a source of revenue for you guys.
And we've looked at, I mean, to charge a fare, goes back to kind of Rolf's kind of comment, to charge a fare actually creates another barrier to people not using it anymore, so you lose some ridership on that. The other thing is, you're just running some, quick analysis, on the back of an envelope type of math work. If you charge like $2 or $3, it's kind of a drop in the bucket in terms of what you recoup in terms of fare box recovery. So, the most transit systems move to try to be a fare-free system. That's kind of the shining, apple, if you will. But yeah, so to go backwards from there, is not really a direction we want to go. I know what you're trying to say is that it might free up some space for, maybe lower income folks. If we charge a fare also, that might drop off some people.
Or I don't know, I didn't know how much revenue you guys would make off of it, but it wouldn't be too much.
It's not a ton.
I think Gordon
My
came up
other
with about
thing was,
10%.
in regards to what you were saying up in North Lake too, like, I work for the kids on site, do outreach out there. Nice to see you guys in person. I'm connecting the faces, so, I talk to moms over there, they're like Spanish speakers, they don't speak English, they have like little babies, they're like 2 months old. It's like snowing and it's like hard to get them to services in Truckee, right? Including the kids though, like they haven't been here for a long time. And a lot of them like they drive or they have to wait. It's just like, there's a lot of barriers. And, I've always thought of this dream of like Tarp Connect, like, and I love that somebody mentioned like the reservation. Even if it's not like every day, like even like 4 times a year would be really like, I think would impact those families very well. And for like other services, like medical services or other things that have to come to down to Truckee with little kids with strollers and car seats, it would really benefit them to have, like you said, that, the reservation option for the Tarp Connect that is safer for them, that comes right to their house in the middle of a like snowy day, just put their baby in there and come to Truckee and get the services they need. So I really like that option that was mentioned out there. When is there like a turnaround for, there's a lot of options and there's a lot of data you guys are collecting, like when will the community kind of see the effects of like the decisions you made kind of like happening down the road? Is it like a couple years or is it?
Oh, we're a little bit behind, but I think by summer we'll have a final plan.
She needs implementation.
Oh, and implementation, well, that would be years, more up to Alfred.
Yeah, so once we get the recommendations, I kind of talked about the bureaucratic, role that the plan has. So once the plan gets adopted, then we submit probably 5 to 6 different grants to fund the program, so then we change all the project descriptions in those grants, give them back to Caltrans and also Nevada County Transportation Commission, and then they fund these new services. So by the time we get the plan, go through that whole process to kind of revamp the system itself, it's probably a, 16 to 24 month process.
Okay.
It actually, and I know that sounds a long time, but all of this lines up fairly well. I've been here, 2.5 years? We've started Tart Connect. We've gotten insane amount of data, in that 18 month period, where if it wasn't working, we'd be sitting here talking about a totally different, landscape, if you will. But as the short range transit plan comes in, that they're working on, our contract with our provider is also up soon. And that's a 5-year to 7-year contract that has to go through Caltrans approval. So all of this stuff actually lines up fairly well, even though it's kind of mind boggling, if you will. But it does line up well to get the recommendations, to look at our contract, to re-advertise the contract, and to restructure our grants based on the recommendations.
Okay, that's great to know, because sometimes when I talk to people, they're like, you went to meetings, so is it happening? I'll be like, no, let me give you reasonable timeframes so then they understand.
Yeah, I mean, even right now, we have 4 or 5 different service changes just in 1 year too. So that's, we sit down every couple of months and have to redo the schedules, and now Sarah and the TMA folks, and we have to republish those and rechange them, and then to do all that. So this will, these recommendations hopefully come out to be more of a consistent year-round system also. And with the Tart Connect type of app technology too, you don't have these static, timetables anymore either. So hopefully we can get to more of a uniform year-round consistent system out of these recommendations within the financial resources we have, of course.
Yeah, Alfred, did you say earlier along these same lines as what Natalie was asking, that 30% of Connect users don't have
They do have an,
3% do?
yes.
Okay, I heard it.
Yeah, now I maybe have said it when I was flipping the two around too.
Good to know that.
Yes.
If 70% had alternative transportation, I would have been questioning the purpose of it. But just going back briefly to Jan's question about, using small, I don't know, using potentially smaller vehicles for the fixed route. To be, I don't know if that's an efficiency. I don't know if that's where you're going now, but that's what I was thinking, is smaller vehicles for the fixed route. Buses.
And it is an option. The bulk of the whole cost of a vehicle, regardless if you're driving a 40-foot bus or a 20, is the driver. So the driver of the cost is what's pretty consistent and fixed across all those. Now don't get me wrong, there is environmental benefit with smaller vehicles, there's cost benefit, there's even level of service, meaning congestion also, there's more capacity in the roadway system with a smaller vehicle too. So there is a lot of benefits to it, but we haven't really had the fleet, if you will, that we will have coming on, because we're getting 6 new vehicles. So we've been kind of, like I said, those vehicles lifespans are usually 5, sometimes to 12 years. So when you buy it with federal dollars, you have to use it for that whole life, or you have to pay back those dollars. So the vehicles we have were kind of developed for a system that's somewhat antiquated now, but we're still kind of stuck with those vehicles. So when we do replace these vehicles, we do look at our need down the road about whether they make sense for the system and the services we're trying to provide.
Because one concern I have is getting people so used to this on-demand thing that, losing the value or losing the impact of a fixed route. I think it's gonna be important to keep that,
That was rather eye-opening. We thought that, like the recommendations that came out, like, oh, we can just do away with this, but it serves a whole different need when folks, especially if we're building more and more of these infill developments, like the rail yard or more dense multifamily housing. Those folks, makes a lot of sense for them to be able to walk out to a bus stop at 7:45 and they can all get on at once versus, hey, I called a ride, he came to pick somebody up and dropped them off. Now I have to come back and get this other person that just booked a ride and take them too. So there is a model where the fixed route does stay. It's more of like a spine system where it would feed into that better. Same thing with 267 and 89, where we will never be functioning or operating routes along there as the town, but we will feed into the Placer County routes that operate along there too.
I want to start with saying, I like the idea of the minimum for Tart Connect,
The trip
the
distance.
minimum trip distance. I didn't know people would actually call them for less than a half a mile. It's like, are you kidding?
She left, but yeah, she was saying she's friends with a couple drivers and they were talking that a lot of high school students are using it on their lunch break to trip in
Go to
town
Safeway or
real quick, or
something.
even just to Safeway for Coca-Cola or something, so hopefully that half mile with.
And then have you looked into doing something like more of like a, I don't know, a zone system where, you know, these 3 buses operate in this area and then this, and if you're going to the different area, they drop you off at the hub. And then you get the Tart Connect from there.
We've started out with zonal kind of systems, if you will. I mean, they did operate within, there wasn't like a zone 1 or zone 2, but there were areas that weren't served and were served. We have talked about whether a Glenshire makes sense, then it, you know, it was discussed at council actually was this equity thing about, okay, why are you treating us different over here and not treating Tahoe Donner the same way or Sierra Meadows?
There is actually a large population of people without vehicles that live in Glenshire.
Yeah, but if, you know, if it's like, okay, so Glenshire gets this many rides per month, that, you know, we'll put 4 buses that do the zone.
Yeah.
You know, Prosser gets half of that, they get 2 buses. You know, and then that way, but that way you don't have somebody going from Tahoe Donner Pools to Glenshire Pool and taking up that van for an hour.
And we were wondering if people were actually gonna make those type of trips and then we were gonna, I won't say invoke the zonal overlay. But that was gonna be like a trigger if we did see a lot of that. And we've seen a very, I mean, I think we can almost count them on one hand about the people that are going from Tahoe Donner to Glenshire.
So most of them are just into town.
Yeah, so the actual, back to the zonal thing, one zone that we did think about is I think it's like 65% of the trips are in our downtown, what we call the downtown core, which is really the Donner Pass Road commercial core. So it's not even just commercial row, it's beyond that to Gateway. Does it, since those trips are the bulk of the trip, does that make sense to create a zone within there? Since those are a lot of internal to internal trips versus kind of internal to external, going all the way to West End Beach or anything, but
How many
yeah,
connect
everything's on the table. Yes, well,
How many connect vans are there?
there is 9 in the whole fleet. So at peak, we do use those 9, but most times it's 7, it ranges between 7 to 8.
What?
It ranges between 7 to 8 is what we typically have on service, but in the winter when it was
No,
like
I know
New
we
Year's.
used it once and called it, it was great, it came and then we got to our, destination, and when we were ready to come back, they said, oh, we won't be there for an hour, so we were really pretty stuck.
Yeah,
Got a ride from a friend fortunately, but, it's kind of frustrating when that, you know, the system was obviously busy, all of a sudden, and so you're stuck somewhere.
yeah, and we have heard some of those instances where people did go out to dinner and then it took them 2 hours to get back home too. But they do look on a daily basis of the peak ridership and when that demand is, and those vehicles do ramp up during that time. And then there's other times where it could be a snow event, or it could just be Friday at 5 when everybody's coming into town where it's
High school
congestion. Yeah, high schoolers going to get a Slurpee. Yes, Ruth? Sorry, Jen. I'm sorry, Ruth.
Distance from the mobility hub to Depot.
Oh, it's about a half a mile.
Because, I mean, like with Depot, there's a lot of bus and train passengers with luggage and with this and that, and, you know, overnight parking is beyond the.
Yep.
And do they use Tart Connect a lot, the people coming in on the train?
Yeah, actually, that has been it's more people that live within town getting to the train that don't have to park their car downtown. So that we have seen a lot of that actually. So the whole multimodal connection of being able to go to all the way to the bay without having to move your car out of your driveway. We have seen a lot of those kind of trip purpose questions at the back end when people kind of fill in the other type of trip. More than I mean, it made me smile to see that there was that many that I was, oh, here's another one. So, yeah, that's opened up a whole nother. And also people that are coming up from the bay, like you said, that are able to get in the middle of the night where they wouldn't normally have a ride because the train is not the most timely. Meaning just that service that comes up from the California Zephyr. So people have, whether it comes in at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, now know that they can get up to their house.
Yeah.
Another factor I noticed was, or I thought about was like weather or like really smoky days, parents with car seats and without a stroller. Half a mile might be a little hard for them, but other than that, I think it's a good idea. Maybe maybe walk the high school, like reservations for a certain time, I don't know. But I think adults in certain conditions might benefit from half a mile in
Yeah.
certain conditions.
Yeah, and we even talked about a seasonality. In a winter is it a quarter mile, half mile, and then in summer it's 3/4 of a mile. And then the whole downtown thing is there not a minimum trip because we do want employees to park out on the periphery but we also don't want to make them have to walk and if they don't feel safe, to have an option too.
We could add more infrastructure through downtown that makes people feel safe.
Yes.
Just talk about that, like, it seems like, other than the logistics of people trying to figure out if point A to point B is a half mile or not, it seems like in the rider's account, they could apply for an exemption to that because they're disabled or because they're whatever, and then there's no
Yeah.
questions asked year round.
Yeah.
They wherever they wanna go, they go.
Yep.
And then along those lines of that, the demographic of the ridership, I'm wondering if again, we've got the hospital district, school district, and the airport district that encompass all of this area. Are all three districts participating financially in this?
The school district has not, we haven't had a request of them. We actually are, just after the meeting last week, there was some questions from Councilmember Henderson and then a few other people too about, how many trips are coming from the school. So we did pull that data. And then we are gonna start pulling the data also from the rec district. As well, and the airport too. In the airport, last year, we did go back to, Mr. Etnier and talk to him about reallocating funds that were originally programmed to the Truckee Thursday shuttle, and we did reprogram those to TART Connect. So the airport did contribute, and the hospital has contributed, since the first pilot every year, and they were 25 one year, 25K, 35K, and I think in last year, they were 100,000. So, yeah.
Yeah, it would be interesting to get the school, especially if you're saying that, I don't want to use the word abuse, but a lot of that usage is coming from kids who are in the school district. So there's some responsibility there for going to school, coming to school, going to lunch, or whatever they're doing in the course of the day.
Yeah, and I remember when we stopped the first pilot, when we didn't go into the fall season, it was actually, we stopped right at almost the first weekend of school started and my phone rang several times. I didn't realize how much I relied on this to keep my kids to and from like the rec center and after school activities too. So it's a discussion that we wanna continue with the special districts.
So one more question along the lines of maybe this doesn't work, but would it be, given that TART Connect seems like it does have a lot of promise in terms of what it's delivering here, would it be possible for us to tack on something that would be a competition to Uber? Where residents could offer themselves or in different timeframes, put themselves in that pool with their own vehicles, and then the town compensates them for that? That would alleviate us from having to buy additional vehicles and pay professional drivers. And then that you could presumably ramp that up and ramp it down based on what the need would be, as opposed to, like, just to say, for example, that between these hours and these hours, we're looking for 5 drivers.
Think it would be on. Yeah, what kind of liability?
Yeah.
My assumption would be insurance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, insurance and reliability. If people say, I don't
What
want
I'm
it.
wondering about is if, like, for example, to me, one of the most impactful slides that you had in there was the concept of taking the fixed route to every 30 minutes. That was almost $500,000 a year
Mhm.
that was added to that. And I'm just thinking in terms of something like this that could possibly fill in for that, for even with an insurance policy on there, that would be.
That would be less than paying for Target Connect.
And it would be flexible. Because it would be something that was scalable over time, that we wouldn't be locked into a 5-year contract that we can't, like, for the next 5 years, this is what we've got, depending on whether the ridership goes up or down. And then you're employing people in town with their vehicles who might be able to participate in this. I don't know what.
I mean, there's Uber subsidy programs, you know, if Uber already exists in an area, and I don't know if there would be enough Ubers here in Truckee, certainly not in North Lake Tahoe,
No.
to have that work, you know, to pay the fare for people.
Right.
And that's often more used for maybe evening service or an extension of something beyond the fixed route.
But I guess what I'm saying is that, like, it's a chicken and the egg kind of thing. There might be a lot of people who don't want to sign up for Uber because they feel like there's not a lot of
As a
demand for
driver,
it.
you mean?
Yeah, but then there's a lot of demand for TART Connect because people are waiting 90 minutes. And then if that was sort of factored into that, where people could think like, well, if I knew that I could get 4 or 5 hours a week doing this, I would sign up for it. And then you do have your flexible, you know, driver force there that you wouldn't have with Uber, because Uber is not going to guarantee them anything. Truck Uber. Uber. I'm just trying to think, because I honestly, when I look at all the slides,
Yeah,
this,
half hour of the service is what really,
it just looks like this is not fixable without throwing millions of dollars at this.
Yeah,
always
I
about
mean,
money.
that's,
And I don't know where.
That is the
money's gonna
bottom
come from
line.
Consistently, and you've got, we're not only you have to have the infrastructure, and then you have to do the outreach to get people into the habit of doing this sort of thing.
yeah, I mean, it's a
And then you-
long-term
And
strategy.
it's-
And that's
without
what,
the guarantee that this is gonna be there forever, people will not wanna make that lifestyle change if they don't have, you know, the option. And, you know, like what Sarah was saying, cause I was also concerned about the 70-30, because I thought, what are we doing here? 70% of the riders can take their, you know, whatever. But, you know, in that case, you know, yeah, I mean, I feel that way, you know, if I call up TART and there's you know, I'm gonna go someplace and I've got a car and it's like a 45-minute wait. Part of me is thinking, I don't wanna wait 45 minutes. Another part of me is thinking, I shouldn't be using this system if it's a 45-minute wait, because there are people who really need this right now. So it just kind of seems like if we could get that,
Yeah.
the wait time flexible, then maybe people think of this more by default rather than as a proof of concept.
yeah, that's a good comment.
I mean, I guess you could think, do you get rid of Target Connect and you put more money in the fixed route, but then it's difficult for the fixed route to serve all the neighborhoods, and that's the benefit of Target Connect. Our last transit plan, we had ideas of neighborhood shuttles to try and serve Taladonna and Glenshire, but it turns out that Target Connect is a better way of doing it. So that's,
Yeah.
for Truckee, the way it's laid out, that's really a benefit.
Or even if like, when we're talking about the dial ride thing and then the possibility of reservations on Dark Connect, which I agree would be fantastic. Maybe that's something where the local tuber concept could fill in on that, because then somebody could see, I need to be in Glenshire tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock and I accept that route, and then you keep Dark Connect flexible for the on-demand stuff. So otherwise, it just seems like this is financially, this is gonna be super, super tough. So
It is, but I mean, what people don't also equate or compare apples to apples is building roads and maintaining roads is not cheap either, so.
We just don't notice that.
Yeah,
Quick question, but I'm just curious, are you seeing ridership to Sierra College?
not a lot, no. And that was gonna be one of these, origin and destination points that we pull from, just to kind of look at these hotspots. We do get a heat map and we do see what we don't see. It's, the reason is it's spread across such a long period of time that it doesn't show up on those heat maps. So you would have to pull that specifically, give it just the way it functions, whether it's a weekend thing versus a weekday versus the evening, when some of those origin and destinations, just like downtown, are just busy all the time. People are constantly going there. People aren't necessarily always going up to Sierra College, so we'd have to drill down kind of more at micro level.
Go ahead. A few
Um,
more questions and then I would want to go.
Yeah, I want to float this again. I floated it over the years. This idea of I call it the Truckee trolley, with concept of a hop on, hop off, high frequency, local downtown area, shuttle, operation that, especially with the far flung parking now from the hub and, all the parking way out on the, rail yard and so forth, that, people moving back and forth, and then with the new park going in, having something that perhaps runs down, from the, mobility center or.
The mobility.
Huh?
The mobility.
Disability, down the main drag through the roundabout down West River Street and kind of in a circle back to the mobility hub. Have a couple of those things running, hop on, hop off. People getting from the far flung parking areas into town, people wanting to go to the park, maybe even overrides the millions of dollars it would cost to build an overpass for getting across the tracks by having that kind of transport system that can move. There's a lot of, I mean, our traffic condensedness it is downtown area.
Yeah,
Most of the year and having a way to move, those people can move around in there. Seems to make a lot of sense to me, to kind of fill in some of the gaps in these other systems.
and we were just talking about having a TART connect, just downtown zone that would just be in that area and for the purposes that you're talking about.
Yeah, like really high frequency, like
It would probably be,
no less than no more than 15 minutes.
Yeah, he's saying not even call, just
Just a
Really
constant.
more
Just
like a
circle.
trolley.
just
Yeah.
two of them,
Hop on, hop off,
just keep turning.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're stopped enough in downtown that, yeah, you wouldn't even need to have stops.
No, it's just,
Still,
Right, that's another
hop on
thing.
in.
Yeah. Yeah, we haven't looked too much at it yet, but we were thinking about the idea of a downtown circulator, which might be more of a demand response to system. Employees are being pushed out to park farther away. How do they get in the businesses to work, and how do we get them there?
and some of those lots get pretty full.
Just need to be one block away from the parking meters. Keeps moving out.
They're all the way out.
I know, they're creeping.
Well, I'll take this, you're welcome to stay and ask us any questions further, but I'll take this opportunity to thank everybody for coming and for your input. And, we have your information and we'll keep you in the loop and to, when the draft final.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Yeah.
Is there an online survey that they